Welcome to Music from Humans. In this episode, I'm thrilled to reconnect with Joseph Klein, a composer whose work is as thought-provoking as it is boundary-pushing. Joe's compositions blend structured forms with improvisation and theatrical elements, creating captivating experiences for performers and audiences alike. Joe is not only a distinguished teaching professor at the University of North Texas, but also one of my own composition teachers. With a career spanning instrumental, vocal, electroacoustic,
I wanted to reach up and shut my own eyes just before I died.
and intermedia music, his work draws inspiration from fractal geometry, natural phenomena, and literature. Recognized by organizations like the National Endowment for the Arts and the American Music Center, his music has been performed across the globe, solidifying his place as a major voice in contemporary music.
This semester at our Music Now, we have our weekly departmental here, and I told the faculty, I said, I think we need to focus on the kind of focal point this semester is collaboration. We should talk about that because we've got a lot of collaborative opportunities, and we want composers to know how important that is, that as a part of their work, you're working with other people, either performers or conductors or dancers or choreographers or filmmakers or whatever, writers. So I think it's a really exciting opportunity for composers, and it's something that inspires us. It kind of pushes us into places we may not otherwise go if
Yeah,
we were on our own. So
I want to diverge into that just a little bit because I think this is an important topic for composers. Yeah, one of the things I noticed with your documentation of this work, you had who premiered it and who it was written for too, possibly in there. And I find it to be relatively important that when you're writing a piece for maybe a particular ensemble or a particular performer, because you can collaborate with that performer to a degree, and also it's that you're writing for their abilities, right? What
right.
things that they can do. Sometimes you do just need to write what you want to write and get that out of the head, but then you can spend a very long time searching for someone who can play it or will play it.
Right.
Um, so it sounds like you had a lot of these in your head ready to go, and but you weren't going to commit the time and effort on them until you found that right person.
Right, right. It's interesting you notice that because there's a few of them, maybe 3 of them, I think, that were premiered by someone other than they were written for. And in those cases, they were situations where I'd written it for a performance and then it just never got performed, or the performer stopped playing or wasn't doing as many performances. And I kinda give the person about, 3 years or 4 years, and at that point, it's kinda like, "Okay, if they haven't done it in 3 years, I'm gonna find another performer for it." So that only happened in about 3 of the cases. In most cases, we had a performance date in mind, we had a venue, we've toured with it, or we've done multiple performances or whatnot. But you're right. The older I get, the more I'm really, just only interested in working with performers that I know and, understand their work and wanna really collaborate, like, really wanna have a give and take rather than just, "I'm gonna write this piece and I'm just gonna give it to somebody to play." Now obviously the pieces get picked up by other players and they'll play them, which is always great when somebody else will play these pieces. But it helps to have the performer I wrote for, when they perform it, they record it, and then there's a document of the piece, like, kind of a definitive recording so that when other people play it, they're not that they're necessarily gonna slavishly follow the performance of the other performer, but at least they know there's a kind of, reference point for them.
Yeah, definitely helps with maybe learning some of the extended techniques, what they're
Ye
supposed to sound like if they're
Exactly.
unfamiliar with
Pacing,
it.
things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd love to hear maybe a few examples about the collaboration between some of these performers, like how did you change things for them or follow some suggestions or listen to other I'm just kinda curious on the collaboration side, if you have a couple of, tidbits on that.
Yeah, so a lot of times I'm interested in knowing, like, what a player will do. So the performer will have like, a lot of influence on the way I'm thinking about the piece. I'll give you a couple examples. So one of them, I have a colleague here, Kim Luevino, who's a fantastic clarinet player, and I really wanted to write a bass clarinet piece, and I had an idea in mind for a bass clarinet Canetti solo, and she doesn't like to play bass clarinet, but she loves to play basset horn. And we had just performed the Mozart Grand Partita together. I played contrabassoon on that. She played basset horn, and she's a great basset horn player. And that's such a beautiful instrument because it's got like the beautiful high notes of like a clarinet. It's got the low notes that are almost as low as the bass clarinet. So I wrote it for basset horn instead of bass clarinet. Um, and it was great because I love that instrument. And that said, performers most performers don't have basset horns. So I made an alternate, I will say that if a bass clarinet player wants to do it, they could do it as well. Works fine on bass clarinet. Um, but it was really the reason it was for basset horn was because my performer liked that instrument a lot better. I will say there's another one that I kinda missed the mark on. My friend Eric Nestler, you might remember Dr. Nestler, he's on the faculty here, he was on the faculty when you were, still a student here. I went to school with him in Indiana, and in the '90s, I wrote a concerto for him, for soprano saxophone and chamber orchestra, and I was very happy with the writing of the saxophone part because I felt like it really fit him well. It really, highlighted some of the things he does really well. He's got a very elegant sound. He's got amazing technique. He can play, like, long stretches without a breath. There's a lot of things that he does really well, and I feel like I really nailed it on that piece. And so about 10 years later, he wanted a solo piece, and I wrote a solo saxophone piece, Die Müde, The Tired Woman, that's the translation of that for, alto saxophone in this Canetti collection. And I kind of in my head, this is where I completely missed the mark. In my head, I had another saxophonist sound in my head. That was Steve Duke, who's a saxophonist he taught for many years at Northern Illinois University. And his sound was in my head. And I have to say, I wrote the piece thinking about Steve Duke. Steve Duke's playing is quite different from Eric Nestler's. So I feel like in a way that piece, and Eric played it, he performed it many times, did a great job with it, but it never felt like a comfortable fit for him like it did like the concerto did for him. And that was a really interesting, kind of an episode for me, a kind of awareness of the fact that, like, it really is important to write for the performer, like, to really, capture their essence and their strengths because I just kind of felt like the piece, it should have been a different piece. I mean, I really wanted to write it for him, but it, it's just I think like his elegance of his sound and the kind of smoothness, this really needed a kind of more raw sound. But since then other players have done it. And again, Eric's fantastic. I love working with him and he's done several of my pieces over the years. But that was one of those cases where it was like, yeah, it didn't quite land like I thought it would.
Yeah. Yeah, that happens. I'm curious on if you have any recommendations on how they figure out what somebody is good at, what you
Yeah.
wanna highlight.
Yeah, there's probably 2 different things. There's one, you write for a person and then you find out what they're good at and you do that. And if it's what you're interested in doing, then that's a nice fit. And then there's the situations, like I said, with the piano piece and the cello piece where I already had in my head what kind of piece I wanted to write. I just couldn't find the player that was that player. And it took me, several years for both of those. And that was a case where every time I meet a cellist, and I met some really fine cellists over the years, it was just like, they just don't have it their playing or their style or their, approach or, the music they're interested in just doesn't really fit this piece. So in those cases, it was like I just kinda waited along, and then when the right person came by, it was like, "Okay, that's the person I'm gonna write for." And in both those cases, it worked out great with Rady Lupa and with, Madeline Shapiro. And then over the years, like, colleagues that I work with, it's kind of nice because we're able to get together. In fact, I'm meeting with a harpist. I just finished the harp solo for this Canetti series. This is my most recent one, number 22. And I work with her here. We're gonna get together next week and go through a few things. She recorded it last month, but there are a couple spots I don't think work that well, and I wanna go back and try some things. So that's really great having her here and being able to bring some sketches in and say, "Try it this way, try it that way." It's a little harder, as you know, when you're collaborating with somebody long distance. I mean, thankfully, we have Zoom now, and someone can pull out an instrument and play some things. It's just not as, well, I wouldn't say enjoyable, but it's just not as practical as it is when
Yeah.
you have them there in the room with you.
Yeah, so with composing this piece that you're talking about, it's still in a malleable state. You're still like, "Hey, yeah, we recorded it, but this didn't quite work. This wanna
Yeah,
change." You have the ability, in your budget there to go back and re-record or redo sections like that,
right.
and that's part of the collaborative effort there.
Yeah, and in most cases, I mean, we did the recording because I needed it for something, for another project, but normally, and this is the case with Rady Lupa, for example. So he did the premiere in Florida in 2018, and he said, "I don't wanna record it yet. I wanna do it, like, perform it 3 more times at least before we record it." And so we didn't record it till, like, a year and a half later, a little over a year later, I think it was, and, by that time, he'd already performed it a few times, and so things had gelled, and we kinda tweaked a few things in the piece and worked some stuff out, and so by the time he recorded it, it felt like it was kind of cooked, thoroughly cooked, you know? And, when with this Heart piece, it was like it was still in progress, and so we did the recording because I kinda needed it, but I even told her, "We're gonna do another recording next year once you performed it, once we've kind of tweaked it." So that the nice thing about that is if you have the luxury of getting a recording, then you can listen to it over and over again and really like, okay, maybe I didn't like it the first time. Maybe I'll listen to it a couple more times. And by the 4th or 5th time, it's like, that still bothers me. I gotta change that spot, you know? So and then other times it's like, yeah, I think this works okay. And there were just a couple things in there. So again, that's a very much a luxury, and I'm thankful to have some really great colleagues that are fantastic performers here at UNT.
Yeah, and I certainly feel similar. I don't think a piece is done until at least after the first performance, and then I
Right.
can go back and make changes on things that didn't work the way I wanted them, or think, I know the piece I just did, I changed stuff. Well, I had some comments about things that were too hard for people, or they needed
Yeah.
to be able to switch bows, and so I made changes before the first burns, but then even after that, I was like, okay, that's just goofy. I don't need to be that pedantic. I'm gonna change this, so I have a list. I've already done a bunch of revisions on it.
Yeah, to me, it's like like you say, it's an organic process. It's like an ongoing process. And the nice thing about I've always been self-published. I just like to have control of my own music and everything. And the nice thing about the internet is that, post a piece and it's like, "Oh, I find something I wanna tweak." I tweak it and I post it up, a revised version. And in the old brick and mortar publishers, you publish something that's kinda locked in, right?
Yeah.
Kinda hard to go back and edit it. You have to go back and like engrave it again and all this kind of stuff. And I just love having these things are just online, and it's like anytime I need to make a little change, I'll change it. Change the date on the end so I know what the most recent version is. And then it's this constantly kind of evolving thing. It's not like it evolves and changes into a different piece, but just refined. Let's say it's
Yeah.
refined, little refinements that go on.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's to me, like what you're talking about, that process of, rehearsing, getting feedback, playing it, getting feedback, seeing the notes that performers leave, and then just kind of letting it kind of gel for a while as you go back and start making the little revisions. I think that's just a really necessary part of the process.
Yeah, I agree. Some folks, sometimes even composers, have the feeling of like, "This is it. I finished. It's done. It's that's it. My first draft is
Yeah.
it," and
Yeah.
scratch my head on folks like that a little bit. Is like, what is performer feedback,
Yeah. Yeah.
being
Exactly.
what, there's it's not done until you're dead.
Yeah. That's kinda the way I feel because I'll keep tweaking things till I can't tweak them anymore, you know? And I tell my students the same thing. The piece isn't finished until and they'll say, "Well, I have a MIDI recording." It's like, that doesn't count. M MIDI MIDI first of all, it doesn't sound like humans usually, or even if you've got really great, like, sound libraries or whatever, it's still,
Yeah,
unless you kind of really a wizard at it. But the other thing is, like, they don't com the computer doesn't complain when you write something impossible, right?
right.
And, violinists will tell you right away that that can't be done, right? So, and I think
Or
that's what
us
I wanna
wooden
find out.
players like, "Hey,
Oh,
I
yeah.
gotta breathe.
Yeah,
Yo,
exactly.
air,
"Did you think
please."
about my
That's
air?"
my problem I get with composers. They forget to let me breathe.
Yeah, exactly. Especially if there's pianists or string players, they don't think about that, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
I have my own little group. I have to temper it a lot because, hey, a lot of them are composers, so oh,
exactly. So
and some of them will play 2 or 3 instruments, and that particular one we need them on is not their best, so I have to deal with that a little bit, but, other than that, it's, you
that
know,
can be a fun challenge too, though, right? You're kinda
yeah.
working with what you have and trying to make the adjustments to get it to work with that particular group.
Absolutely. I mean, that's a key. That's what I was preaching to a couple of the younger composers in the group not too long ago. It's like, don't change your style, but find a way to make it work
Yeah,
with this, right?
yeah.
I always talk about this with some composers about like, write the same piece 3 ways. Write it for, the New York Phil, write it for the community college or whatever, and write it for a high school. Exact same piece. It should be recognized as that same work, but in these different performer skill levels.
Yeah, yeah.
And that is a really intrinsic skill as a composer to have.
But of course, the hardest ones to do are for the high school group and the
Yeah.
younger ones, right? So those are really hard because you have to kind of pull back your impulses to kinda let it loose, right?
Right. You got to keep it easy. But like, I remember a piece from my high school that uses something I still use today, and they would have different instruments play, like, little flashes so that it would come across the high school band,
Mhm.
and I mean, it was an easy piece. My high school band played it, but they had that, and I still love that effect to this day where you get different groups to play
Yeah, yeah,
little sparkles. So it's like, it's completely possible to do something that way and yet make it simple for kids. And
yeah,
plus,
yeah.
you throw in some simple ways of improvising and you can get some complex feels with letting the
That's
kids go
true.
crazy.
You can kind of get like, by allowing them to do something that's outside of the score, they can make something that might be more complex sounding, so
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Because they can't read the music or play their instrument that fast, but they could go crazy up and down on it,
yeah.
with their own freedom, squiggly line, you know?
Yeah,
Here,
yeah,
play a squiggly line. So you don't have to worry about them actually hitting all the notes because
yeah. No, that's good,
yeah.
it's a good challenge.
Yeah, definitely.